Welcome, welcome. We are starting another episode of The Self-Aware Leader. I'm Ron Oltmans with Lead Skill, joined by Angela, and we're going to be talking today about beginning the EQ journey. And the particular focus that we want to bring to this episode of the podcast is to talk about how leaders and how you specifically can begin your EQ journey or getting a little more insight. You've already begun your journey. And it's like, so where am I on my journey and how can I take it further? How can I grow and just get deeper and develop myself further along the way? So those are the sort of topics that we want to share today. And for those who are joining us live, we just invite you to engage with us, not just by listening or just, kind of sitting back and soaking it in. That's fine too. But if you feel comfortable and you're so led, we encourage you to engage with us in the comments and share your questions. And if you're watching this on replay, certainly drop us a comment and give us ideas about how this is speaking to you. And if you have some ideas for future episodes or guests that you would like to see us approach and how we can serve you better, because we're really doing this for our viewing audience. So thanks for being here today. Angela, welcome.
Hello, hi.
Yeah, it's good to have you.
Dropping a chat to welcome people and doing multitasking. So
Yeah, we have to wear several hats, don't we?
yes, new times, new things of doing things, new ways of doing things. Yes, yes. So do I
So
kick us off, or do you start with a question? Tell
um
me.
I guess it depends on if you feel led to take hold. I can also lead. The whole point is like, beginning the journey. So a lot of people would say, well, start at the beginning, right? If only it were that easy. So it's like, where does the journey begin? That maybe that's a good
Okay.
place to
All
for
right.
us to look at.
So I come from Singapore, and I remember when Daniel Goleman with his book came out, Emotional Intelligence, and I think that was during the time, was it 9/11? I can't remember. Was when I started seeing more conversations that at least in our lives, um, paying more attention to those things. And one of the first things that I had in my mind was when I saw the word that book, emotional intelligence. The first thought I came to mind was just how many intelligences, is that a word to use, are
Sure.
there? So would you? I don't know if I'm putting you in a spot, but could you just tell me just how many intelligences are there? Yeah.
Yeah, it's actually a great question because growing up, uh, I had the impression that there's just intelligence, right? If you want to
Right. So
measure it,
growing
you
up for
take an
me was
IQ test.
Mensa, right? That's the club to be. And I knew people and friends and classmates was like, Mensa was the thing. And I was like, okay, I'm not Mensa quality. So I don't know what kind of intelligence I have. Yeah.
So yeah, IQ is kind of like the original intelligence. And it's funny because I have a friend that I met when I lived in Singapore in the early 90s who went on, he came back to the US. We met in Singapore at the time, but he was American. Came back and did his doctorate in psychology, I believe, up in New England area. And he was taking all these courses about, psychometrics and assessment and things like that. And he alerted me when I was visiting him in Massachusetts about, well, actually the whole construct of IQ is kind of suspect and the way we measure it. And I was like, oh, really? It's kind of like a light bulb went on for me. And so to answer your question more directly, Howard Gardner um, was kind of one of the originators who came up with the idea challenging that there is only one kind of intelligence. And he said, no, there's actually multiple intelligences. There's, of course, emotional intelligence, but there's physical, there's musical intelligence, there's, all sorts of other ways that you can be smart that are not just about verbal skills or like knowing a lot of words, knowing a lot of knowledge, being able to recall things, but it's like intelligence can be multifaceted. And I'm thinking he came up with like 6. Don't quote me on that. But I know that there's no widespread agreement in the field. There's a lot of different opinions and theories about how many different intelligences there are. But I think pretty much today, except for just a few people who are really stubborn, most people would say there's more than one intelligence, that
Yeah.
people can be smart in different ways.
And who is Gardner? Howard Gardner?
Howard Gardner was a professor and researcher at Harvard, if I'm not wrong. And, he's recognized as an authority in the field over the years. I mean, he was especially active in the 80s and 90s, and I think he's still alive, but probably retired. And so, yeah, I've got a number of different books by him up on my shelf, but most people in this field have at least heard of Howard Gardner and his theory of multiple intelligences.
I've come across the name before, so I know the name. I can place him, so that's why it's like I guess everybody should just Google if they want to learn more about his work.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
and
and actually the term of emotional intelligence,
Mhm.
we've talked about this on previous episodes. It was more of a concept that has been around for centuries, and a long time. But as a special term in English, at least, it wasn't. We can't find evidence of it until like the early '80s when a guy, Wayne, I think his name is Wayne Payne, used it in his dissertation, his doctoral dissertation, looking at emotional intelligence specifically. And then Peter Salovey and John Mayer actually did research on emotional intelligence, and they are like early pioneers in the field in the 80s, late 80s. And then Daniel Goleman, that you mentioned, came out with the book of emotional intelligence, 1995, early, mid 90s. And so when I found out about it, was it was a few years after the story had already broke, so to speak. And I'd heard it as a buzzword in the coaching community, but didn't really buy into it. I was kind of slow to accept it.
Yeah. Lead skill helps leaders become more self-aware. And in our previous conversation on StreamYard, we talked about one of your interests, Xenophon,
Mhm.
who were you shared where just by reading his accounts, Anabasis and other things, it shows Xenophon to be a person who you picked up as self-aware and aware of what's going on, and there was more than meets the eye in his accounting. So self-awareness is not a new conversation, but something that dates back for a long time ago. And for us in Chinese culture, my grandparents were from China, the idea of introspection is something that we're aware of. In fact, we have a mooncake festival that just passed, where the tradition is we gaze at the moon, drink tea, and read poems, and do self-reflection. So for leaders, I don't think that is something that, unless you're Chinese, where you drink tea and self-reflect, which your mom says this is the month that you need to eat mooncake and reflect. I don't think many leaders, would you say, are actually in the space of that kind of inquiry. And so how should one start, and how did yours start?
Yeah, I'd say it depends. I've met a decent number of leaders who did at least give some attention to self-awareness and reflection and trying to learn, whether they use tools like journaling or like even a retreat or time away from work to do some deep thinking and those sort of things. So but it's not nearly as widespread as it should be, or as it could be, in my experience also. So yeah, I referenced that I heard about it in coaching circles, and I was introduced to the whole field of coaching in the late 1990s. And I recall this. In fact, I I wrote a LinkedIn post about it a couple months ago, about In 2001, I was given a what do you call it? An exercise. Um, so I was part of a coaching firm, an executive coaching firm. We were having an offsite retreat. Well, I say offsite. We were a virtual firm even back in 2000, but we were all coming together in one place in Yellowstone, Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and we were going to have a training at this retreat on emotional intelligence. And so part of the pre-work was to keep track of your emotions and thoughts 3 times a day for 2 weeks. And so do an emotional tracker. And I was given a list of words that might help, in, getting into your emotional life and describing them. I think that list had over 100 words on it. It was, quite extensive. And so I did the exercise. I was dutiful, although I kind of had some judgments about it. Like, I'm not sure how useful this is going to be. Now, here's the really poignant part of the story for me, because my last entry on that tracker was the day before our retreat was going to start, September 10th, 2001. And so I got in my car, leaving Texas, headed to Colorado for our retreat. I was traveling overland. And then the events of 9/11 broke. And so our retreat never happened. The emotional intelligence training never took place. And, in the ensuing years that followed, I would also say that my own discovery of emotional intelligence, it was a self-study thing, but it was kind of stillborn. I mean, it wasn't something that I really pursued in earnest until years later. So I've kind of taken a long journey, the long way around, I would say, to discover more about myself, to gain self-awareness, and to grow in emotional intelligence. That's a key part of my story. Now I'm interested to hear yours. Like, how did you first start engaging, and learning about emotional intelligence, and what's the beginnings of your story?
I'm just really present to as you recount the story. I realized that we need to talk about it, after this all when go off air. I was wondering what happened that week, because I was stuck in the Bahamas. I was doing a lot of soul searching, and 9/11, when it happened, I remember Ginny, my Bahamian mama, friend, said the U.S. space shut down. You can't go home. I was like, what? And it was a painful and difficult moment in my life, and I was glad to have the crazy way to reflect. I remember one of my uncles received news on it, and he says, it's fine. The U.S. airspace will open up, and you just hang in there. It's the Bahamas anyway.
Yeah.
So when you ask me my EQ journey and how it started, its moments, sometimes life presents you unexpected big moments like that, where all of a sudden you have to just stop and just kind of take note. How are you feeling emotionally? What's going through? And so that the head and the heart are all in connection.
Yeah.
So I guess I've always been interested in dealing with what I'm feeling and how I'm feeling. And I don't see things clinically, even though in my society where I came from, anyone who's maybe 2/3 smart or 1/4 smart, you should try to be a doctor. And I don't think that was too clinical for me. I've always wanted to know the feelings part. And I love partnering with you because you are very cognitive, you're very intellectual, and it balances me out because I need both. You can't just do emotional intelligence like just everything goes. You need the brain, you need the mind to rein in and to study your emotions like a scientist. Yeah. So I would say began as when I was a young person, even questioning things like, why do the Westerners express feelings in one way, and why do the Chinese express things in another way? the Malays that I knew. I grew up in Indonesia as well, the fourth most populous nation in the world. Ton of Muslims with prayer calls at 5 o'clock, and they are different in the way they express themselves, but they're all, I would say, emotionally intelligent, but the way they express them, their emotions were different from the Chinese as with the Westerners. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I'm recalling in the past month a specific incident when we were taking a day trip. We are based here in Houston, and we were going down to Galveston, which is down on the Gulf Coast, for a day. And in our conversation on the drive down there, I remember you shared a word in Chinese that I was not familiar with. And then, I came to find out that you said it's actually a pretty common term that you grew up with. And it was just something that was, yeah, it's just part of, your experience. And I was like, huh, I've never heard of this. And I thought I knew a lot about Chinese culture, but you said fanxing,
Yeah.
the concept of fanxing. So can you share that with the viewers or listeners right now about this whole concept and what it means, at least in the Chinese culture that you grew up in Singapore, which is part of the diaspora or the overseas Chinese community. It's not part of mainland China, but share with us about that.
Yeah, I don't know about 反省检讨. 检讨 means, examine, self-examine. 反省 means wake up, wake up and examine. So the Chinese language teachers in our public school system where I was raised would talk about such things. I don't know about now, at least when I was raised, where I was raised. And then at home, one of the words that would come out of my mom's mouth would be, if I do something, and she would say, 要自我反省. 自我反省 means take time to self-reflect and consider what you've done and said. And, and I think the implicit request in there was examine if it was the best way you should have responded, reacted, and was it useful, not just for yourself, but also for the good of others. So it's not just thing as like, oh, about me, but how did it affect other people? And should you clean it up as well? Clean it up,
So the
meaning
idea of
like,
self-reflection. And
yeah,
when I looked into it a little bit more, I realized
yeah,
that, hey, wait a minute, this is not just something that parents hold over their kids, or like it's not like a parental lecture sort of thing, but in fact, even into adult life and in public life, that, for example, if you are director of a big company, or if you're a government official and you do something that is like a big like mistake, or it's seen as like, whoa, you really like, you kind of went off the rails there, and you did something that's deemed wrong,
yes.
you'll be given official leave and told, go examine yourself, go spend some time fancying, right?
Right. And it's not just the ethos and for professionals. When we were living in China and doing consulting work there, when we were in Lujiazui, which is sort of the Manhattan of Shanghai, I remember talking to just the people on the street. It could be the cobbler or just someone who's just a vendor. And in some conversations, don't underestimate people. Just
The
because
common
of
people.
uh,
Yeah.
common people, how they look, they actually have much more wisdom, whether it's the principal of a school or someone just on the street earning just maybe $1 a day. Um, and
So you're saying that fancying
yeah,
is like something that is shot
part
through
of it.
society from the
Yeah,
lowest to the highest levels,
yeah.
and from the youngest to the oldest.
Not everyone would take it on. Just like, I was a public school educator here. I've taught math. Not everybody dig math. It's just not
Mhm.
everybody could take it on, but it's available. It's in the
Okay.
air.
Okay.
It's how we live. So if you take it on, anyone, you don't have to have a PhD and you can get it. You can understand that you can function. So
I'm struck, Angela, by the fact that just before my part of the story beginning, the EQ journey, which is 2001, that in that prior year of life for you, you kind of did a self, set exercise of self-reflection when you wrote your own memoir, about, I think you called it Thus Far, but you did a lot of deep excavation and
yeah.
self-discovery. Would you say that was a very significant part, if not the beginning of your EQ journey? Or what would you say about it?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, now that you mentioned it, I've not thought about the structure of my memoir back then, but now I realize it was a piece of fancy work. Because the theme was, I remember Kath helping me, a Canadian editor who's, now in the corporate space now. The theme that I had was 我, 家 and 国. So I didn't start with the 我 means I, 家 and 国. It started with the story of 家, which is home.
Home or family, right? Right.
Yes. And then the second part of the story was 国, country. No, the third part was 国, and the second part was 我. So they
Which
were
is
all
self.
intertwined. Yes, self. And 国 means country. They were all intertwined. How I relate with the world, and the world relates to me, and how to make sense of it, and what
Mm.
is it about. It wasn't a meaning of life kind of thing. It was, what is meaning? You give this. So that's another conversation. There's an ontological conversation. But it was making sense, coming to terms, recognizing and becoming clear about what my convictions are, what mattered to me, like a
Yeah.
compass to help me live. Everyone should write a memoir one time in
Yeah.
their lives. And, I love it. I love helping people build those stories like that. So, I don't know where this conversation is going. I'm so sorry, but I get so lit
No,
up.
I think it's good
Yeah.
because I would just say I would overlay that and
Mhm.
say, to continue a little bit from my own personal, story from 2001. It's kind of like the Inklings, and I was like, self-awareness,
Yeah.
yeah, something but I was still young,
Yeah.
relatively young. And it's interesting because I put myself into a
Yeah.
self-development course in the middle 2000s, well, about 2007. I went to Ireland for a
Mm.
course that we called Odyssey. It was a week with other consultants being led by a master consultant. And part of the whole process, the pre-work again of that whole program, involved doing your own personal strategic plan. And one set exercise within that was to write part of the story of your life, up to that
Mm.
point, do a reflection. And so I started actually doing my own excavation. I went back and kind of, captured what I considered the significant chapters of my life up till that point.
Mhm.
So the previous 40 years or so of my life, I wrote not a memoir full blown, but kind of the outlines of it. And I still go back to that document and I update it every year, even up to this
Mhm.
very year, 2022. And I don't know how long it's become, like 25 pages, 30 pages or so. And it's not like a narrative, but it's like all the significant events of my life put into a chronology. And that is really a touchstone for me of recreating and remembering things that have happened and helping me sift through events and order the significance and try to understand them better. And so that was important for me in my own self-awareness.
Mhm.
And I look back to that document, even to today. And so that's another part of my own path or journey.
I wanna know how that keeping that year after year has helped you up your EQ or self-awareness journey, because this is life and we didn't practice like what we kind of like know what we want to talk about, but we
Right.
didn't like, okay, here's the talking points.
Right.
So when you mentioned about my memoir that you just kind of like brought it up, I realized that it was one of the tools that I did to help me become more self-aware
Yes.
and up my EQ, so that when we decide to have children, I was ready. I didn't go into blind. I was ready.
Right.
And so I wrote that memoir. Also, I didn't know where that mention is because we were supposed to be in the US for just 5 years because you were in Singapore for the same amount of time. And I thought equal, right? So we're just going to do 5 years in the US and then we're going to choose a third continent, and that was Europe to live. But I have been here for over 2 decades
Yeah.
with a brief respite in Shanghai. So, yeah, I realized that was a tool that we have. So I'm just on screen, the only person right now. I'm not comfortable. So, okay.
Well, you're the one talking, so I give you the
Okay.
full real estate.
No, I do not like that. I love to be behind the scenes instead. So,
Well,
yes,
so let me
I
put
didn't
this
realize that.
in
Mhm,
for leaders or, for people watching and are kind of thinking about the
mm,
beginning of your own EQ journey. Um, because part of the value I believe of this whole podcast, the self-aware leader, is it's not just one person talking and it's not just one person's perspective. You get, two different perspectives at least. You get Ron and Angela, but you get male, female, you get East and West. And I come at things more really from experience in the business world. And I think you come at things more from the creative side and
mhm,
education,
mhm,
side. So what I would point out is besides Angela's memoir that she referenced and that whole exercise that she did around the year 2000,
yes.
um, she did a lot of self-development and started with this book by Julia Cameron called The Artist Way. And some of the exercises in there too, particularly, I know stood out. And you started practicing them around that time that really led to you doing a lot of writing at the moment. One is called The Artist Date, which I'll just mention it. We'll just kind of leave it to the side. But it's to help you kind of, you know, let your inner artist or creative side have some play space, some playtime. The other practice is called morning pages, which is a specific type of journaling exercise. And we'll talk more about journaling and about mindfulness in a future episode. But morning pages allowed you to really do a lot of self-awareness and emotional intelligence work in long form, longhand writing in a journal. And that's one path to actually develop greater emotional intelligence if you take it on that way.
Um, I don't know why, but all of a sudden I feel called to share person in my life, Miss Chung. She was from Malaysia, and if you know anything about the geography of Southeast Asia, Malaysia is located, you know, I don't know, north, south, east, west, just it's located close to Singapore. So we get a lot of Malaysians coming crossing the border to come into Singapore to work. And one of the individuals when I was growing up was Miss Chung, my English teacher, who would get up very early in the morning to come teach at the high school that I was in. And in one of my English classes, she said, "There is rain in everybody's life." And that sentence just caught my attention that I mull over for many times at that season of my life. And I realized, so if I, when you mentioned I come from the creative space, I think about like, I think that's one of the messages and what I love about the name of your company and what you want to do is you bring awareness to people, to leaders who actually can make leaders, words, actions, what you do, how you do affect not just you, affect your employees, affect your stakeholders, affect the
Your
community,
customers, right?
customers, affect if you have, international business, affect other people beyond the
Mhm.
US.
Right.
So we carry a responsibility in how we speak, how we see things, and all that. And so
Mhm.
when you up your EQ, it just benefits everyone in all ways. And people are actually depositing information into you to help you become awake. You know, I think the Japanese have this even have a phrase. It's like wake up, like Alan Watts talk about it, like wake up, right? for you to become more aware that um, we are not just people with skills and talents that we bring to the company, but we're also people. And I think that's why we have, I was so confused. We have Mental Health Awareness Month this month, October, too. And I was like, wait a minute. Did we not just have one in October? And then you explained to me that, well, that was the US. Now it's the world. I was like, get it. I got it. That's why I got texts from people in Singapore letting me know about, it's Mental Health Month here.
World Mental Health Awareness Day, I think, was yesterday, and then we've got
Yes.
Mental Health
Yeah.
Month and Mental Health Week. I mean, there's a
Yes.
lot. So you
Yes.
would
So
think that
it's
we
a
would have more awareness, but we don't yet, do we?
exactly. So I'm so glad that we're having this as a collective, that we're coming together in this conversation. I think, like you said, when it was 9/11, during those times, we're just little pockets of people, not that we're unaware, or like in the last week's conversation. This is something that, it's in Xenophon. That's why we have this stoicism that's still trending out there that people want to know, we're not just
Right,
intellect, we're
right.
people with emotional intelligence. And so what exactly is EQ?
I I would go back to my kind of standby definition of EQ, that it's being aware of and able to manage emotions and thoughts, both in yourself and in working with other people. So awareness, self-awareness, management, self-management, and then social awareness, or another word, empathy, and then social management or social skills, being able to manage emotions and being aware of those emotions, both in ourselves and in working with other people.
You said it really clearly, very succinctly, but I'm a person that needs sort of like a visual or something I can relate. So in the roles of whether it's a father, a husband, a son, a friend, a teacher, a consultant, you know, can you just kind of like give me something that I can like, oh, that's how he upped his game in terms of EQ.
Um, I recall, first of all, something that happened just this past week when, at the time, I, was having a conversation with someone, and they were being not just playful, but in fact being a little bit provocative, trying to kind of, poke at me and get a reaction. And and it was pretty effective. I mean, I felt poked, I felt provoked, and I wanted to lash out. I wanted to get even, and to, match fire for fire. And I recall at the moment, just in that time, having this, glimmer of, I've been here before with this person, and I've fought fire with fire. I've tried to match word for word and, argue and debate. And I don't like the person I am afterwards when I do that. I don't like the interaction because it doesn't lead to more connection. It just kind of creates more antagonism. It doesn't advance the relationship. And so, as difficult as it is, I, in the moment, had that both awareness and a decision to not fight back and not to argue and not to escalate the situation, basically, and to just kind of hold my peace, hold it, inside, so that for the sake of what I'm committed to in the relationship and for my own mental health, my own mental, uh, good, I'm just going to take this and remain calm and not be triggered.
I knew that you're not sort of like a Zen monk or anything like that because I watched you over the course of 3 decades, and how what I notice is you are able to respond the way you just responded this past week with this person is because it's the result of a series of of things, a cumulative effect. I remember a long time ago, many years ago, when you were practicing Aikido and eventually it became a Shodan. I remember you were just lying in the living room, in the carpet, and just resting, just like that, for minutes, in the evening. And I'll be like, "What in the world are you doing? Why are you doing this?" And like, is this even right? Because we go to bed only at night, But you would practice these simple acts of what I call meditative exercise, just a few moments, almost like Winston Churchill, like just take a 15 minutes just to decompress, rest, lie down. That's what you did. And you're whole again, new again, refresh again. You did that. And then you also just recently released a book on breath work, right? So
Yeah.
my question is, um, was there a moment where you just kind of like all the floodgates broke through and everything just come like, aha, I know how to be self-aware, you know, and I'm just on every day. Oh, it's like I'm thinking of like a curve, like a graph, you know, where it's just like this and then it's just, exponential growth. Or was it like, or is it more like a sine curve, where it's just go up and down, and you're becoming more aware of it?
Um,
So my question is, with all, first of all, it's like it took time. Yes.
yes.
Yeah. It took time. It took practices. Yes.
It takes practice, and um, it's not a linear sort of practice or process where it's like it's just steady rise and goes up.
Yeah, because we're all Superman. We just, yeah, eventually, right? We're all self aware all the time, which is a myth. Yes?
Yeah,
Yeah, it is.
unfortunately so.
Yeah.
But yeah, so as you were asking the question, I was thinking, and my experience has not been like, I think you mentioned like the Japanese, there's a Japanese word called satori, which is enlightenment. I think that, is used both in the Zen world and in the larger Buddhist world. But, and then just the whole idea about you have that, waking up process. I can't track a specific time where I had an enlightenment episode or like a ding, and the lights came on and it was like night and day difference for me. I've not had such a thing, but I've had certainly moments of insight
Hmm.
and, greater or heightened insight. And so it's not exactly like either one of the options that you gave me. I've not had what I call the parabolic curve where all of a sudden it shot up and I had this, breakthrough sort of experience. And neither is it exactly like the sine curve where a sine curve to me is like oscillation, but there's kind of a midline that from the height and the depths that it kind of falls to in the middle sections. And I think for me, it's been a little different. It's more like I will have moments of insight followed by stretches of what I call a plateau, of kind of like where it seems like nothing much is happening. There's not much progress or development or growth. And then punctuated by later on another moment of insight where I do go a little higher and reach another new plateau. And that's not to say that I don't have like retracement where I come back down, so, but it's not exactly like the regularity of a sine curve where I'd say there's, the word that comes up for me is oscillation, where I can just say, there's just been this steady line and I've been above it, I've been below it, but it like keeps coming back to this middle. It's not like that. I think my own life is taking a direction that's not just that flat line, but it's neither is it a straight line. And so I don't know really how to answer your question except to
Yeah.
kind of describe my experience that way.
Yeah, now I can see, why you set up your work the way it is. Because, like, for instance, with your coaching clients, it's an extended period, a year or 6 months is that kind of relationship
Mhm.
where you are with the person, helping the person, walking them through. And when, when you're dealing with um, insights, sometimes and often really, they're not pleasant to look at.
Yeah.
They're not pleasant to look at.
Yeah.
I'm a life coach myself, and I have a coach myself that I've used for many, many years. And in one of our latest conversation, I was like, I grow in terms of the way I communicate as well with her. And I remember it was like she said something. She said about like, yeah, honey, it's not pleasant. She's much older than me. She said, it's not pleasant what I'm saying to you, but I'm here because you want to grow. And that's what coaching does. You
Yeah.
hold someone accountable and you help them grow. And I'm not just
I happen to know, though, that you have not always had, like, the warm fuzzies
oh
or
no,
even like
I want to slam
a
that phone.
yeah.
I have done that and she is okay with it. I need
Yeah,
that.
there's been conflict or, even, like, moments of antagonism in the relationship with your
Yeah.
coach, right?
Mhm. Yeah. Mhm.
But
I know she's committed to me just as you are committed to your clients. Yeah.
and like you are committed to your clients, and so it comes back to, the relationship matters.
Mhm.
And, even if we hit rough patches or we have conflict or we have like widely divergent points of view on issues or points,
Yeah.
we come back to, we can find a constructive place to engage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, it works both ways. We all learn, and that's what I love about coaching. And and in this field in EQ, I also know that the people in the mental health space, they are more also who work, those professionals, they're very empathetic, social work, because they see the broad spectrum of people, and they've taught me a
Yeah.
lot under
Yeah.
the and there is a place for therapists and social
Mhm.
workers to
Mhm.
help support and heal
Right.
the wounds. And
Definitely.
so I'm just glad that there are consultants, coaches, therapists all working together
Mhm.
to help one another become more emotionally intelligent. It's been very useful. I think it really makes better leaders
Yeah.
and leaders that don't burn out so much, because leaders, if you learn to up your EQ game, you know, um, you you don't burn out so much because you don't have to carry so much. Not that you start blabbering everything out there, but you learn to have the right support system into your life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know that you recently were looking at things like your strengths, and then afterwards you started looking at your weaknesses. Um, w say, something about the value of a coach in a process like that when you are doing that self-reflection, you're trying to gain self-awareness, and what a coach can offer that you can't do just, on your own DIY.
It's funny, I just kind of like just pivot. You didn't ask for this. So one of the things I do for Lead Skill is I make sure Ron's content is out there as well. And so I was working on something that you did, your leader's greatest strength, and how leaders focus on their weakness instead of their strengths. And find that you're always, when I read, I don't take on a lot of, I do different things because I'm very protective of what comes into my space, what gets into my brain, because I work on, I think about it, and I, not just as for my own good, but for the good of the people that I serve. So the article talk about looking at strengths, and well, even though it was just, I was in that role of putting, basically, checking the technical part of the work. I learned to let the work teach me. And so you were a great coach through that article. It's not just in the moment of face to face talking, because it had me think about what my strengths are. It had me ask you and other people what my strengths are. It had me look at my DISC report again. The DISC report, which is an assessment tool that you offer. And also had me look at Highlands battery test. It's just different things. And also helped me see what my weakness were. And that was not a fun place. As you pointed out in the article, like, gosh, the more I looked at my weakness, the more I feel yuck about myself. It is the truth. But what I saw when I examined my weaknesses was that I need to talk to someone like a coach to hold the space, to walk me through and say, yep, that's you schmuck, that's that's what your stuff is. But it's okay. It's when you want an empathetic coach coming in. It's okay. We know this is not your strength. So let's work on what your strengths are and not be unaware or avoid your weaknesses.
We have a lot of self-criticism, and um, I think that if we were to really objectively record and then analyze our internal dialogue,
Yes.
we would probably be shocked to notice the mismatch or the imbalance between the amount of negative self-talk that we do versus positive self-talk. I would imagine that it outweighs, the negative side probably outweighs the positive 4-1 or 5-1 on average. And so I think a coach can help us strike a better balance between the fact that yes, we have weaknesses and we also have strengths. And then to also be a little more objective about the fact, like I said in the article that you were talking about working on, that, if you just look at it in a rational, standpoint, the time spent working on a weakness, even if you work really hard on it and very diligently for a long period of time, you're only going to get from poor to maybe mediocre at best. And the return on working on a strength that you're already good at and enhancing it and going further is like so much greater. You're going to get so much better yield and you're going to feel better about yourself and you're going to produce better results. And so that's why I was encouraging leaders, like, you need to give a lot more attention to your strengths and only pay attention to the weaknesses that are really critical to your success, and that you have no good alternative for addressing. So let me keep this practical. One of my weaknesses is I'm not particularly well organized, and I'm good at starting things, but I'm not that good at follow through and keep operationalizing and keeping things going. And I've become aware of this over the years, and I know that I own it. It's one of my weaknesses. So I could keep working on it and trying to get better at it, which I have. And there's really no, I can't excuse myself and say, oh yeah, just delegate that, give that to other people. But I have learned I'm going to be much better off if I continue working on it, because it is a critical skill. And there are times when there really is no replacement. There are no alternatives. But there are a lot of times that I've learned where there are alternatives. I can hire other people to take care of the consistency and the operationalizing and taking care of, systems and maintaining systems over time, or helping me stay on track, so that I don't have to be the one doing that all the time. And so there are alternatives for me to address that weakness. And in the few situations where there are no alternatives, yeah, I've got to work on it, right? But then there's other weaknesses that I become aware of. I'm not, in my mind at least, I'm not particularly creative in the sense of, like, drawing, fine motor skills. I'm very literal. I'm not a very good sketch, person or a pencil artist, that sort of thing. And I'm just okay with the truth that I'm not great at it. It's a weakness of mine. And I would rather admire other people who are really good at it, have a natural talent, they have a flair, they're really good at sketching, they're really creative and, drawing things and expressing things through pictures and symbols much better than I am. And so I'm okay with that. And that's not a weakness I'm going to work on, even though, I could feel bad about it. And I would say the same thing about leaders is there's weaknesses that we become aware of, and you really have to look at whether it's something that's critical to your success. And then further, if it is critical to success, is there other alternatives for being able to take care of that weakness without you having to give dedicated attention to trying to become better at it?
I like your style of management because I'm not a full-time employee of Lead Skill. I've been a strategic partner because I've been married to you. So we talk,
Yeah,
yeah, I'm aware of the business. But in terms of lending my professional skills, I'm not a full-time employee. I have my own independent work that I do. And I like that because um, you have to treat me like a customer too. In terms of when we talk about workspace stuff, and things like
right.
that. And so it's um sounds complicated, but it's not actually not complicated because we have certain boundaries of what works for us as a couple.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you talk about weakness, I suddenly had an aha because in during the pandemic year, I decided like with all the extra times, like I'm going to look at my journals that I've accumulated over the years in the US. I started that practice when I moved here because I was stripped away from everything that I had before that had
Mm,
built up. And it was like
mhm.
went to nothing. I went to ground zero. And then start all over again. I wanted to sort of like, okay, just, I don't want to just pour junk. And I don't know, I just wasn't comfortable with the therapist thing, even though I tried, maybe. Um, so journaling was my recourse. And you just mentioned the artist way, just morning pages, just unconscious pouring out of your thoughts and putting in just all the stuff. And then later on moving to mindful journaling, where I'm cognizant of what's going on and just wanting to do reflections and goal planning and hold myself accountable. Because at the end of the month, I will look at my journals and see what, or when a journal is over, is complete, I will look at, okay, what got done, what didn't get done. So there were multiple ways of how I use journaling. One of the very hard things that I kept and not being able to look in my journals, even though I had it out, and then my question is coming, is I didn't realize it was hard to open those pages. I didn't realize that because it revealed a lot of my things that I was grappling with. Things that
Mm,
made me feel yucky. And I didn't want to feel yucky. So when you said in your article, even though it's very short, about like focus on your strength, but I want to know my weakness. I want to know my blind spots, you see? Because I believe there's value in it. I didn't realize it was so hard and how important it was to dialogue with a coach, with someone else, someone that could like just hold space, be gentle, but also um, be able to speak truthfully into me as I work through my project. So my question is, what's been your relationship with journaling? Was it always like when you open it, like, whoa, what gems? Or was it like, oh my gosh, am I still in that space? Have I not grown?
yeah.
What's it been like?
So, yeah, journaling. I even did a video on this about 9 months ago, 10 months ago, at the beginning of 2022 about mindfulness journaling. You can find that on our YouTube channel here. But, you know, I shared the distinction. In fact, I would give you the credit for that, actually coming up with it. The difference between junk journaling, where you're just trying to get your thoughts out and your feelings, in
Yeah,
whether it's yuck or whether it's wonderful or whatever, but just putting it out there on the page
yeah,
to try to order your thinking. And that's, contrast that with mindfulness journaling, where I'm really trying to cultivate a particular sort of a quality of mind, a quality of awareness. And in mindfulness journaling, I'm really, you know, I'm not just trying to blah, spit it all out and get it on the page. I'm trying to calm myself and come back to the center point. And so I can write around the topic as long as I'm getting closer. I'm spiraling in on the point, the important, the significant in the midst of all of it, the meaning. And so, you know, those two different distinctions, and it's okay to do either one, just be clear which one you're focusing on. I think that's one way. And I know there's some people who would say, I'm not someone who likes to journal. I don't like to write. That's just, journaling isn't my thing. And that's okay too. We're not saying you have to do this or that that's an essential practice for leaders. I'm saying it is one powerful practice that a lot of people, including myself and you, Angela, have found very helpful and insightful. And if you've never tried it, give it a try. Or if you've tried it and found it wanting, maybe try it a new way or a different way. But if you tried a lot of different ways and you've exhausted it and you just said, no, it just isn't for me, you get my pass. It's fine. Find other ways. There are many ways to work on ourselves in self-development, emotional intelligence. There are ways to grow on your own journey. And the fact that it is your journey, it's your personal story, and you're going to find some tools more helpful than others. That's okay. Own it and let it be yours.
So I keep separate notebooks. I have one that's like a gratitude journal where in that space, it's all about being grateful. And then I have these cheap notebooks in which I just sort of like, it's my subconscious, morning pages, my yucky stuff, and something's got good stuff in it too. So it helps me, this delineation has helped me become, just aware of, how about you? Do you just keep it in one book and say, okay, oh, you put a tab that says junk journaling, mindful journaling? I mean, how do you know when you do junk journaling, and how do you know when you want to do mindful journaling? Was it like then?
Yeah, I've tried to keep them in separate journals in the past, and I've done that. But where I am right now in my life is that I use the same journal for both. I'm just clear about, I label it, right? Right now I'm going to do some, just download. And I notice when I go back later and read my journal again or reflect on it, and I think that's an important point too, is like the junk journaling parts are usually not that helpful to revisit. They're better for like purging or catharsis, but it's not necessarily good for analysis or study later. But the times that I've done more mindful journaling, I usually find good stuff and rich stuff that I can revisit and that is worth, really thinking about and, going deeper on or elaborating on. And so I'll do that. And so I put them in the same journal right now. That's where I am.
So do you also, prior to sitting down and putting your pen on paper, other practices that you do? I mentioned just now about how you would rest and do breathing, and either on the carpet or lie down or breathing, which I see you do. And so or out in the yard and just picking up weeds and just mental wellness. So are these unconscious things that you do prior to your writing to download, or
I wouldn't say that writing is necessarily the central practice for me. It is important, but it's not the central thing. I'm more trying to just integrate all the different practices I have kind of into what I call self-care or self-awareness practices. So another example, like the mindfulness framework, the breath framework that I talk about in the book, A Guide to Mindfulness Meditation. Lately, I noticed I've been trying to integrate that into more activity-based pursuits. So, for example, I went on a walk last night by myself. I often do walks, together with you, but I did a walk on my own. And as I did it, I didn't take something to listen to. I didn't take earpods or my phone, and I didn't listen to music or a podcast or anything like that. But I tried to be more mindful, and I used breath. the breath framework, just to do a walking mindfulness meditation and be aware of my body, be aware of the environment that I was in, take a inventory of my emotions, my attitude, things like that. So, learning to expand or to add on like adjacent territory. Like mindfulness is something you can do sitting still and practicing, at your house or in your home or in a quiet space. Mindfulness is also something you can bring into your, physical activity and exercise. And it's something you can bring into your writing, as we were talking about with journaling, mindfulness journaling. So I'm trying to explore these edges and take it into, increasingly wider parts of my life, my
Wait, wait,
everyday
wait.
life, and
If
not
I just
restrict it to just a narrow part.
if I just interrupt you, so you say could bring mindfulness into your physical activity, into your work. Immediately I'm thinking like bring a pet to work, bring, bring.
Okay.
So I'm like, so when that's what I hear. So, so I'm like,
A
you can
pet
bring
is
it.
a
So can you tell
companion
me like,
animal can be a very calming and
yeah,
centering and nurturing thing. And so
yes.
that can be a mindfulness practice, is just spending time with your pet and so to bring your pet to work. Yeah, I can totally get that as a
How
mindfulness practice.
I akin mindfulness to be like bring a pet to work where it's help. So tell me, how do I know if I'm bringing mindfulness? Because it's not like I could, it's not as obvious as, like an attachment that I hear you go like, how can you give me some tips, sort of like, how do I bring mindfulness into as I go into what I do is, or, how I live?
So we can expand on this. We could, I expect for us to do future episodes on mindfulness just all by itself, but
Yeah, I
it
saw the
doesn't
I'm
hurt.
sorry.
It doesn't hurt to, you know, sprinkle or seed the idea now.
Hmm.
First of all, what is mindfulness? It's being aware on purpose in the moment to what's happening, both inside and around you. And so, how do you bring mindfulness to all these different activities? Well, you have to be intentional. It's choosing on purpose to be present, to not be mindless, but to be mindful. To, like, if you're washing the dishes, be there doing the dishes and not thinking about other things or disassociating, being out of that, moment with your mind flying off somewhere else. I'm not saying it's wrong to do that. It's just that that's not mindfulness. So if you want to practice mindfulness, you bring yourself to the present moment, to whatever you're doing, whether that's sitting still, doing the dishes, walking, bringing your pet to work, whatever, and you're cultivating on purpose this present moment awareness of what's happening inside and around you. Pretty simple, but not easy. It's pretty simple to describe, not always easy to practice.
I realize in our conversation how multifaceted this topic of EQ is. And it is a conversation that needs to be discussed,
Yeah.
and that tools that one would need to help us become better at conversing this conversation, as well as, to up our own EQ. And I think one last question, not I think. So one last question is like, why is it so important? Want to talk about the social conscience part. Why is it so important for you to talk about this? What do you see in our society, or that you see missing, that you want to bring this conversation into the leadership space?
You brought it up. You referenced it earlier when you talked about Chung and the teacher from Malaysia, and you mentioned about leadership and how, I choose to work in the leadership space because leaders are able to impact the people around them and the organizations and the teams that they lead. And so the reason that I am talking about self-awareness and self-aware leadership is I want to make sure that leaders are using that influence that they have and that impact that they have on others for constructive good, for helping people, for building a better society. I mean, you just look around you, there are people using their power in abusive ways, and they may be aware or not so aware of the impact that they're having on others, or they may be kind of aware and then dismissive or rationalizing of the reason for it. Like, you know what, I'm acting in the best interest of my tribe and forget about the rest, how that impacts them because I'm taking care of my own. And I want leaders to practice more self-awareness and then reaching out from there a greater social awareness so that we don't just rationalize, we don't just write it off or ignore the impact that we're having on not just people in my tight inner circle, but the next circle out and the next circle, the waves, the ripples. Our actions have consequences. And so, I mean, here in 2022, toward the end of this year, we've had this ongoing thing happening between Russia and Ukraine, not to get political, but, one of the consequences of the leaders and the choices that have been made is, for example, Ukraine produces a lot of wheat and it's a food staple in a lot of parts of the world. And so there's places in the world, in Africa and the Middle East and other parts of the world where the prices of food have gone up. And people are finding even just daily living very, very expensive. I saw something about in Tunisia, and I know in Lebanon, just a couple of places, where they're dependent on these, wheat exports or imports actually. And, people are complaining saying, we don't even have food to eat. You can't even buy food in the store. It's not a matter of the food being too expensive. There's not even food stocks or supplies there. That's an example of like a leader made a decision to protect their own or to, take steps. I'm thinking of Putin specifically in Ukraine. And then that has a ripple effect that affects people in a much wider space.
Yeah.
I don't know that he ever thought about those consequences or, thought about the responsibility for other people. But that's kind of one example. But you can reduce it down to, on a much smaller micro level. My choices today have an impact on others. I'm still just now learning what those are. I mean, in my own journaling, I'll just be very open. In the last 3 or 4 days, I've been looking at the last year, 2021. And part of my journaling exercise is I'm becoming more aware of how, some of the things that I did not do, some of the things that were good ideas in my head, but I didn't take action on. The failure to take action had real life consequences on people. And I was either unaware or I just kind of like pushed it out of, to the edges of awareness and ignored it. But I'm taking time now to say, that's not something I should be intentionally ignoring. I should be aware. And I need to make a conscious choice about what I'm doing now and acknowledge the ripple effect, the consequences, the people close and the people more remote that this affects. So I'm trying to practice this for myself. And that's part of what I would encourage leaders to look at is you're at the center of the ripples you're sending out and become more aware.
Yeah, when you were sharing all that, I was reminded of what a pastor said to me when I was just became a Christian in my teen years, and he taught me something from the Bible and said, "Not everyone who wants to teach should teach," with reference to biblical teachings, because I think he was teaching me and helping me see that to carry those kind of truths, it's not just a matter of sharing words verbally, but how you need to live your life. So
Yeah.
not everyone who knows should teach. So in the same way, when you said all that, it's like everyone who uh, have the opportunity or leading, they always examine, because not everyone who has that position should lead because there are consequences. It's something I learned as my
Yes.
takeaway. That's my
Yes.
takeaway. Yeah. So thank you, Ron. And I don't know how we're a little bit over time. So do you want to talk about what you have coming up, or how you want to close out? I'll let you close the floor. Yeah.
Thanks. I would just say the journey of leadership, to make this real practical, um, you may, in fact, be very clear about your journey and be able to tell your story, which would be a great thing. I'd love to hear more about it, actually, because I find it's rare among leaders that they have that kind of command of their own story. Much more common is that people have the pieces, but they've not put it together. Lead skill, we can actually help leaders with that. Angela is very modest, but she's great as a digital storyteller and as an interviewer about helping people explore the events and the episodes and the contour of their story. And so that's one of the things that we do. Other leaders have not even thought much about emotional intelligence or EQ. And if you're watching this, maybe you know a leader who falls into that category. And it's like, it may be a delicate thing. Like, how do I introduce them to this? And so at Lead Skill, we have found ways, whether it's through the avenue of mindfulness, whether it's through assessments that we do with leaders or through coaching, to encourage this process of self-discovery and self-awareness. Now, it's often couched within trying to get better business results, right? And so part of executive coaching is that leaders will often hire us for very extrinsic reasons, because I want better results in the business. We want to grow here. We want to do that. And I see that, coaching will help accelerate or get me further down the road, get me there faster. Great. And oftentimes leaders are not necessarily coming to us saying, yeah, sign me up. I want more self-awareness. I want to grow in this area. But most people who come to us know that that's part of the package. That's what they're going to get, as well as the more practical extrinsic things that they're working on, the goals that they want to achieve. And so we can help in that area too. I would just say, think about ways, and if we've hit some spots that resonate with you, please reach out to us, drop a comment, or actually send us an email. Go to leadskill.com, find our contact, page, send us an email, and, just say, hey, let's talk. And we'd be happy to set up a time, either a Zoom call or a phone call, and to discuss further what you're up to. And if there's anything we can do to help on that, in some situations, there's no immediate place to partner, and that's fine. We love to meet new people and to, keep in mind for the future and to explore options to be, like partners in crime. We're going to find a way to do work together. I've done that with people in the past where it's like, we didn't find an immediate place to engage, but, we eventually got around to it. So we welcome that. And in the meantime, we've got resources. So at leadskill.com, you can find articles, you can find exercises, and we try to share things very freely and openly in public that you can draw immediate help or benefit from. So use those, avail yourself of them. And then if you're ready to get a little closer, a little more intensive, and get some coaching and some focused help, reach out to us and let us know how we can do that. We do, team trainings. We also do speaking at events. So if any of those are of interest, reach out to us. But I really welcome you for, I'm glad that you joined us today and that you're watching this on replay. You've stuck to the end. And I just want to say thank you. And we're doing this Wednesdays, midday. Catch us on the live stream. And we welcome you to be part of this. And if you've got people, again, that you think we should be talking to, point them out to us. And if you're one of those people, let us know. Let us get to know you. So signing out, Ron Oltmans with Lead Skill. Thanks for being with us today on another episode of The Self-Aware Leader.
All right. I'm Angela. Bye-bye.